Hello, everyone. This is your lovely Vice President, Edward Tahmizian. You all know I have that scholarly paper that was accepted for publication on the origin of evil and theistic art determinism around 3 years ago. It's still available online. And today, once again, I'm going to be interviewing the great and legendary Dan Barker, who is the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation with Annie Laurie Gaylor. And today we're going to talk about some of his past publications and some to date news on the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Edward. Good to talk to you again. You can probably tell I have
Awesome.
a pretty bad cold. And yesterday I could hardly even talk, but it's a miracle. Well, it's a half a miracle.
There
Uh,
you go.
I hope I can make it through this thing. One thing I do ask you though, please don't pray for me, okay? Then I'll probably get better faster if you don't pray for me.
It's a good one.
Um, yeah, well, good to see you again. Uh, I just got back a couple weeks ago from my first visit to India,
Oh,
which
wow.
was which was
That's
pretty
cool.
amazing. I went with Amit Paul, our director of communications, and his family's from North India, and we were invited by Avinash Patil, who's the head of this man's group, anti-superstition, anti-blind faith organization. And we met
Okay.
with groups all over the country. I was surprised how diverse India is, the different languages. And I thought everybody spoke Hindi, but a lot of people don't. They speak Telugu or Tamil or Punjab or some other languages. But we met some really great people. We were at the Mumbai Press Club. We were at the Delhi Press Club, very prestigious, at the Gandhi Peace Foundation. In Vijayawada, we visited the Atheist Center. They have a huge atheist center right
Oh,
in
wow.
town,
In India. That's awesome.
and it's been there for years, since the 40s. It's a highly respected institution. Um, it's not just philosophy. They have a big library there, but they help people. They have like a trade school and a halfway house for shelter for women. They have a program to try to help prostitutes get back into regular work. They have cultural education. They have programs and all that, and they also have some kind of like helping women who want to sell products. So the state really likes the Atheist Center because they're helping people on the ground. They're really doing real work,
It's
and
important. Yeah.
they're not like out preaching atheism. How can you be so stupid to believe in Ganesh? They're not doing that. They're just letting it be known, hey, we're atheists and we're doing this work. And two different governors of the state have come to speak there, and members of Congress. When I was there, there was a member of the legislature who was there speaking. So it's like it's India is like so diverse that most of the people are accepting of variety and diversity, which is kind of nice. I say most of the people because that doesn't include the current government. The President Modi's BJP party is very right wing Hindu nationalist.
Oh,
And he's trying to do since 2014 uh, with Hindu nationalism what Christian nationalists are trying to do in this country, making it a religious democracy or a Christian based or Hindu based democracy, which really is not a democracy then, because there's no democracy in the Bible. So a lot of the activists and atheists and uh, humanists and rationalists that we met in India are fighting back against what they're some of them are calling it neo-fascism. We went to the Periyar Center in Chennai, and that's like the Atheist Center. They have a big center there where there's like healthcare and there's library and there's bookstore and uh, there's a marriage center where people can go in and get casteless marriages and interfaith marriages. They don't care, and gay marriages, and so they are also in the streets helping people at the local level. It's kind of a bottom up way of putting your worldview into action. If you're an atheist, you don't believe there's another world, so you put your efforts into this world, and that's what they're doing, this world first. And the Periyar, who was the founder of it, who's dead now, he was on an Indian postage stamp, And so was the founder of the Atheist Center in Vijayawada, Gora. He was on an Indian postage stamp. So atheism is not a big thing in India, but
Mhm.
it's not dismissed. It's not like vilified. Atheism is considered a part of the fabric over there.
Awesome. And how was the food there?
Well, it was varied. It was really interesting. It was good food, but
Oh, that's good.
every place you go, it's different. And I was surprised. All these different languages in India, each state is almost its own country. In Tamil Nadu, they speak Tamil. They have their own culture, their own housing construction, and their own food and all that. And a lot of them don't even speak Hindi. So Amit was with me, and Amit speaks Hindi. He was a great interpreter, but he could not interpret from Tamil or from Telugu up in Andhra Pradesh. So sometimes we needed two interpreters. But the food was great. It was affordable,
Oh,
uh,
there we go. That's cool.
and Amit's from India, but this is the first time he's actually traveled anywhere beyond the north. So he
Uh,
was just like me. He was saying, "Oh wow, so this is a different part of my country, and different foods and different customs." And he saw more of India on this trip than he'd ever seen in his whole life.
right. Well, that sounds interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And I guess for our next topic, I'll have you mention some latest news from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Like, how are things going on your side, or what is some like up to date, like hot topic that you all are covering that you want people to know about and be aware about? Anything special?
Well, yeah, we just had a big victory in Texas.
Hmm.
The current governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, when he was lieutenant governor under Rick Perry, and we made some complaints in the state, he told us specifically, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, don't mess with Texas. So we sued the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, because in 2015 we had our secular nativity scene in the state capitol. It was totally
Hmm.
approved. It had legislative approval, sponsor. It went through all the processes of their committees and everything. So we
Hmm.
put up our secular nativity scene next to the Christian nativity scene. And our nativity scene had some of the founding fathers in the Statue of Liberty gazing adoringly at a manger. And in the manger was not a baby, it was the Bill of Rights. Because December the 15th is the birth of the Bill of Rights. Christians might have some claim to December 25th, but they don't own the whole month. The whole month of December isn't just owned by them. And so if they're going to put up a nativity scene in the middle of December, we put up our secular nativity scene, informing people of the historical adoption of the Bill of Rights of our US Constitution, which is actually something real. So Governor Abbott saw that and he ordered it taken down. He said it was like offensive and did not promote Texas values. He took the thing down. And so we sued him under free speech and we won and we won. Since 2016, we've been suing him and he keeps delaying and delaying and he loses and delays and loses and appeals and change. Then he changed the policy and now he's saying that it's no longer a public forum. It's really government speech because he wants to keep us out in the future. And so he's lost and lost. And just uh, 2 weeks ago, was it? Or a week ago, it's front page story of our next newspaper. Uh, we got the final decision that yes, we have won, that Governor Abbott was wrong to censor our viewpoint. If it's going to be open to all viewpoints, he can't segregate one viewpoint over another. Uh,
Yeah.
but the court said that we we could go back to court. It depends on what they do. If they put the nativity scene up again, this time as government speech rather than a private forum, a public forum, then we could take some legal action in that case. But anyway, we have a good, strong victory there. Another nice victory is I'm sure most of your viewers know about Thomas Paine, the forgotten founder of the United States. Thomas Paine was the person who wrote the pamphlet, the booklet, Common Sense, that that George Washington had printed many copies to distribute to all of the troops, and they all read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, giving them this motive to continue the revolution and to revolt against the ills.
Yeah.
And so Thomas Paine was a great American patriot. He was born in England, but he came over and lived in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and he he also later in life was working with the French Revolution over in France, and when he was in prison, he wrote this book called The Age of Reason, which was very critical of the Bible. Extremely, in fact, it's a wonderful read. I bet you've read it, Edward. And Thomas Paine was not an atheist. He was a deist. He believed in an impersonal creator God
That's
who
how a lot
wound
of the
up.
founding fathers were. They were
Yeah,
deists.
yeah, a lot of them were. The deists were the kind of pre-Darwinian freethinkers. They didn't have
Mhm.
a mechanism for how did life begin, and but the deists in their daily lives, since they didn't pray, they didn't go to church, they were what we could call practical atheists. They lived their lives as if there were no God. They thought there was like the force that started it all, but it doesn't write books. You don't pray to it. It doesn't do miracles. It's totally uninvolved. So in a
Mhm.
practical sense, the deists, most of them were were atheists. Although someone like Paine might say that he would pray to nature. God doesn't write books, but he did give us this nature to look at. So he was not really an atheist in his own mind. In any event, and he was also critical of some of the actions of George Washington, and it was a big no-no back then to criticize George Washington. And so he's become sort of a forgotten founder. He's the person who named the United States of America. So uh, we and some other groups, and Annie Laurie especially, and our lobbyists in DC, have been working, and we formed a Thomas Paine Memorial Association with Margaret Downey too. I'm sure you know who Margaret Downey is, who's been promoting Thomas Paine for decades. And through our connections in Congress, we're able to shepherd a bill through Congress, a resolution to establish a permanent Thomas Paine memorial in Washington, D.C., a statue to Thomas Paine, basically, in D.C. There's never been one. There's one to Washington
That's
and,
so
and
cool.
Lincoln and Jefferson, and there's all these memorials. There's even a memorial to Lafayette in Lafayette Park, and he wasn't even an American. And so we got the bill shepherded through, and it was quite a process. You just can't stick a bill in Congress. You have to get all these committee approvals, and then you have to get these other external agency approvals. And so it got into the omnibus bill last December. And in the last week of December, President Biden signed it into law. Excuse me. So there will be a Thomas Paine Memorial in Washington, D.C. And a lot of the impetus behind it was the free thinking groups, like our group and others who have been pushing for this to happen. We have a wonderful sculptor, Zenas Frudakis. It's not a done deal. He still has to be approved, but it
Mhm.
looks like he's such a high ranking, he's highly respected international sculptor. If you've ever been to Philadelphia and seen that freedom sculpture where the figure is coming out of the wall, it's like four different figures, and then the figure is totally free. It's a beautiful thing. It's award winning. Zenas did that sculpture, and he's always interested in ideas and thoughts and philosophy in all of his work. So he has worked up a wonderful, whatever you call it, a workup, I guess, of the statue. So it's very likely, it's not firm yet, that Zenas Ferdakis will be doing the actual sculpting of the Thomas Paine Memorial. So we're pretty excited about it. And one of the stipulations was that no government money was spent. So a lot of people have contributed to this, including a very generous donation from the Todd Stiefel Foundation. He wanted to see this thing happen as well. So we're
That's cool.
very appreciative of Todd Stiefel and others who've contributed to make this happen. So someday you'll be able to go to DC and do your pilgrimage to Thomas Paine.
Yeah, I'm sure Eddie Tabosh will love to hear that. After this interview, I'll send him a link to this. I'm sure he'll appreciate a lot of the things you just said.
Yeah.
And for everyone who doesn't know, if you haven't heard of Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker's interview on the Oprah Winfrey Show in the early '80s. You should check that out. That's still available on YouTube. You should watch the whole thing. They talk with religious people, and they have like a good debate. I thought it was very very interesting. So that's still available on YouTube. And I guess to conclude, do you have like a work that you published in the past that you want some people to be aware of? Or did you want to talk a little bit about some points you make in that book that you think our audiences would like to hear? I know you have a lot of publications, but what's one that you really want to talk about?
Well, so I have about, it depends how you count them, about 10 or 11 books.
That's
Um,
awesome.
I'm going to have to cough here, sorry. I won't die from that. I'm going to die, but not from this. Um,
Good to hear.
so the book that I wrote, God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction, which was based on Richard Dawkins' famous sentence, because that's his phrase. The God of the Old Testament is the most unpleasant character in all fiction, which is the first sentence of chapter 2 of his book, The God Delusion. He got some pushback from that sentence. You know, his book is pretty gentle. People have accused Dawkins of being strident and angry, but if you read it, it's not really strident. That one sentence, though, has been pretty hard hitting, where he says, God of the Old Testament is the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive,
Oh yeah, I
misogynistic,
remember that.
homophobic, race.
Yeah.
He goes on and on and on and on. Misogynistic bully, he says.
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah.
and so he was thinking of making like a PowerPoint slide that listed each of those. I think it was 19 nasty descriptions of God, and then he asked me to fill in the Bible verses to prove it. Well, there got to be so many that he suggested this could be a book. So a book came out of it called God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And you can go to the chapter on misogynistic or homophobic or unforgiving or whatever. Plus, I found a bunch more. So in part one, it's called Dawkins Was Right. And I give all these Bible verses to show that he was right. And then in part two, I say Dawkins was too kind. And I give even more, I think 8 or 10 more. Well, that book is now out of print from Sterling Publishing, but it's coming back in print in a couple of months through Prometheus Books, which is now owned by Roman and Littlefield.
Okay.
And we just finished the final. They had to remake the whole book basically, and then I expanded it because the first book I had to cut out a bunch of verses. So in the new book, I put them back in again, and I have a new preface. And so that book will be coming out, I think, in March or April, I don't know, or May. You can look for that. It's basically been out of print for a year. Then I have a book I'm working on, which is not going to be ready for another year. It's called The End of Worship. And part one is done. Part one is defining what is worship. And I bend over backwards to let the believers speak for themselves, because one thing you don't want to do is attack a straw man. You want to set up the
Sure.
strongest man you can. And
Steel
I'm
manning,
telling
as Jeff Louder calls it. Yeah.
steel manning, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, because the needle in a haystack, there's the steel in the hay, in the straw. Uh, so I'm telling believers, I hope you will come away from this part one saying, yes, he got it right, so that there's no disagreement. Like sometimes we critics and skeptics will attack something, but they'll come back and say, but you're not understanding the whole picture. So in fact, if any of your listeners want to help me proof it, I can send you part one and you can look through it. And in part one, I'm saving my criticisms for part three.
Okay.
Part one is what is worship. Part two is why do we worship? And I have a novel, so far as I can tell, I have a novel hypothesis about the origin of worship as I define it in the end of part one. Because you can define worship 20 different ways. And if you're going to write a book about it, you have to focus on, well, how are you defining it? So as I define it, I have a novel, I think, adaptive evolutionary hypothesis for why so many people have this need to take up these postures of slavery when they worship. Their hands are shackled, their heads are bowed, your body is prostrate. I am little and you are great. You know, all these things that
Mm.
go into when people worship. Sometimes they get goosebumps and raise their hands. And not everybody worships the same. Some people feel none of that, and it's like a curve. But I was one of these people that I felt it all when I was in church. Why did I do that? What was it in me? And I think my hypothesis is that it's biological. I think we have been bred to be worshipers. Just like we breed dogs and sheep and cattle. And look at Christians are called sheeps and there's a shepherd. So anyway, I'm proposing this hypothesis, and I think I make a good case for it. And when you read part two, you'll have to decide what you think. um, Basically, I think that inner feeling of a true adoration that makes you want to raise your hands and cry and bow down to a master. I think that's very new in our species. There couldn't be a king of kings until there were kings. There
Yeah.
couldn't be some concept of bowing down to an overarching lord until there were such a thing as overarching lords. And I think the kings and the lords and the military leaders and the plantation owners and to some degree husbands have carefully been breeding our species to be sheep, to be worshipers. Anyway, um, you have to read more about it. And then part three is going to be, should we worship? Is
There you
it good or
go.
not to worship? Whether even if we have this sort of, even if there's a partial evolutionary feeling within some of us to raise our hands to a Lord, should we do that? Is that good? Often history shows us that a slave revolt is much more interesting than just a story about slaves that are just, you want to see somebody break free and get loose of all that. So anyway, that's going to be, I'm excited about that book. It's getting me up in the morning. So, but that won't be ready for another year.
Alrighty, well, thanks for sharing that with us. And just to close out, our co-founder Jeffrey J. Louder always says, "We don't want to straw man our opponents; we want to steel man them." In other words, he defines steel manning as your opponent gives the best argument and the best evidence they have for their case, so to make sure that everything's being adequately represented, and then you go against that. And I really like that ideology because then after the end of the debate, people can see, clearly who's won. No one can make excuses and be like, "Oh, that guy just didn't understand his position or defend it well enough." And also, I think it'd be interesting for both of our audiences to understand that sometimes against atheists or even agnostics, theists will come up to you all and be like, "You can't say that this and this is morally wrong because you don't have an objective moral standard." And then to that, you can say, "Oh, actually, we do." And and I actually talked to Dr. Jason Thibodeau, one of our member at larges from Internet Infidels, about why you don't need a God for morality. We have a long video of it, and we still, man, we bring the best evidences for needing a God for morality and the best evidences against it, and we all come to the conclusion that you don't need to have God for objective moral values. And your audience can check out that video. It's just the Edward Tahmizian, Dr. Jason Thibodeau interview. It's one of my recent ones. You can check that out. It's long and extensive as well. So there's that on the table as well. And then,
Okay.
all right, well, thanks a lot, Dan Barker, for being on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And I've done, ladies and gentlemen, I've done two other interviews with Dan before. We talked about evolution. We even talked about K-pop a little bit in our last interview. We talked about the um, role of extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. And so you can all check out those interviews as well. All righty, sir. Well, thanks again for coming on. And in a couple of minutes, I'll send you the link to this interview. All
Thank
right. You
you.
have a good day.